Welcome to the Starting Over Stronger show, where you'll find help and hope for your divorce survival and recovery. Divorce well, live well.
Hello, and welcome back to the Starting Over Stronger show. Today, I want to talk with you about a very hot topic, a very difficult topic to nail down, and that is the subject of covert narcissistic abuse. We're going to talk about what it is, how it affects people, what are the signs that might be happening to you, and how you should respond. I wanted to talk about this because although for the last 2 years on this podcast, almost everything we've been talking about is with regard to difficult or high conflict divorces and has been centered on and revolved around covert narcissistic abuse and how much that complicates the process of separation and divorce. But we've never actually just defined and described and talked about what covert narcissistic abuse is and how do we awaken to it and exit it and create a life that we can love outside of it. How do we understand our part in it so we can do something about it? And I know that none of this is easy. I'm not going to pretend like it is because there are no easy answers. But today on the show, we're going to just start to look at this subject a little bit and pick it apart. And the reason I wanted to introduce this subject to you specifically is because I'm in the process of the final edits on my memoir that will be released this fall. The title of the book will be Starting Over Stronger, and the subtitle will be Awakening and Exiting Covert Narcissistic Abuse to Create a Life You Can Love. And it has been a lifelong goal and dream of mine to write a book. And for a very long time, I didn't even know what that book would be about. I've always just felt like I had a story in me and I couldn't even really define it. I've actually written a lot of articles and obviously a lot of the content for this podcast, but nothing that's really come together enough for book format. Until going through my own awakening and exodus from covert narcissistic abuse almost 5 years ago. And then finally getting to the place where I was able to have enough hindsight to get my life story on paper and to get it to the point that I can produce it for you to read. And of course, I have to say also, I'm in no way the perfect example of how to awaken and exit covert narcissistic abuse perfectly. But I can say that I have created a new life that I love. And in a lot of ways, I think I am a good example because I've done it. And if you're listening today, you might be in a place where you can't say that yet, but you would like to be able to one day. And my hope is that by reading my story and understanding how I got from where I was to where I am now, that I love, is not just a fairy tale. It's a reality. And my hope for you is that you would be able to take that away and make that your reality as well. So today, what I want to do is just kind of give you the Cliff's Notes version of my Starting Over Stronger book so you can have an idea of what covert narcissistic abuse is and what to do about it. If you were to read the book, and even if you never do, my hope is that this snapshot today will help you to understand what it is like to be in a relationship with someone who is a covert narcissistic abuser. Maybe it's not you. Maybe it's somebody you love that's trying to describe their pain to you, and you're not able to understand it. And by listening today, you will come to an understanding of being able to relate in some way to what they're going through. And then most likely, if you're listening here today, it's because you are dealing with this. You are in or trying to leave a covert narcissistic abuse relationship. And what I want you to know is that whether or not your abuser is ever diagnosed, and the vast majority of them are not, because they would never put themselves in a situation where they could receive such a diagnosis. And the people who are their victims are actually the best sources for determining the level of narcissism that someone might have. One flippant remark that I hear often is, aren't we all a little narcissistic? And honestly, nothing gets under my skin more than hearing somebody say that carelessly. And the reason that I get upset about that is because no, we're not all a little narcissistic. There is no such thing as a little narcissism. Narcissism in the form of covert narcissistic abuse is a poisonous thing. You don't have just a little bit of poison. You either are poison or you are not poison. Now, maybe we're all a little selfish sometimes, certainly. We sometimes might try to control things out of fear. Maybe we even occasionally manipulate circumstances or situations without realizing that's what we're doing. And so, yeah, we all have these kinds of tendencies to have protective behaviors because of our own issues. Yes, that's not narcissism. That's not narcissistic abuse, especially in its covert form, which is very insidious. And it creates almost a dysphoria for the victims who often truly believe they are the problem. They believe they're crazy. They believe every lie that's ever been told to them about themselves and about the relationship that they're in, to the point that they can't even see reality for what it is. And so, no, again, we are not all a little narcissistic. We all have faults, most certainly, but covert and overt narcissistic abuse is a very different thing. Most people who are narcissistic have zero desire to look at their behavior or the consequences of their behavior and the way that it affects other people. And in fact, they don't want you to look at their behavior either. They want you to just let them behave in whatever way they want, say whatever they want, do whatever they want, be whoever they want to be. And you just have to go along with it and be okay with it. And if there's a problem, the problem is you, because they don't have problems. And even if they ever come to a place where they might be willing to admit that they have a problem, it's usually because they want to use that admission as a trap to further manipulate you to stay in the relationship, so that maybe they might even go to counseling with you for a season of time. Maybe they would even submit to some kind of a diagnostic process of trying to determine what might be wrong with them, quote unquote. But the truth is, they really don't want to know. And that process will reveal that fact if such a process were ever initiated. And they would use that to try to further gaslight you. So that's just a little brief introductory thought on the whole topic of what a covert narcissist looks like. But what I want to do today is really break down the signs of being in a relationship with someone like this. How do you know if you're being abused by this subtle pattern of controlling, manipulative, and hurtful behaviors by someone who is narcissistic? And not everyone presents the same. Covert means that something is not evident or not openly displayed. And then on the contrary, overt means that someone is evident and openly displays who they are. So when you think of the word narcissist, most likely you think of an overt narcissist because their behavior is so obvious. They're out of control, they're hurtful, they're manipulative to the people around them. They may be borderline personality disorder or a narcissistic personality disorder, or they may have no diagnosis at all, but they have symptoms of one or the other of those. And they may also just be a jerk. And how do you know if they have a personality disorder or not? Well, the truth is it really doesn't matter. The label doesn't matter. The diagnosis doesn't matter. What matters in our lives and in the relationships that we have in our lives is our behavior. What matters to other people is how we behave, how we treat them. And what matters to you is how others behave and how they treat you, the effect that we have on one another. So when we look at narcissism, like I said, it might be covert, it might be overt, but you might know of some overt narcissists because they're just like that with everybody. They treat everybody like crap. And so it's more obvious and more out there. And you may also know some covert narcissists. If you're listening here today, you've probably tuned in because the title piqued your interest. And so unless you're in a relationship with one of them, I would say you don't know the extent of the damage that covert narcissistic abuse can do. Because when you're on the outside of it, you get their public persona. And they're usually a really dynamic and charming, great guy or gal that everybody loves. They are often successful at work and or just very well liked to everyone in the community and out in the world and their workplace, except with the people that are behind the four walls of their home, the people that they're married to or their children are the ones that will see them without their mask and know the real them and their true identity and true tendencies.
Are you tired of feeling alone and stuck in your current situation? Whether you're in an unfulfilling or toxic marriage, in the middle of a messy divorce, or maybe still seeking a better life after your divorce, Starting Over Stronger has a support group for you. You'll meet weekly online with a group of women experiencing all the same pain, fears, doubts, and confusion. And you'll leave there each week feeling heard, known, and cared for. You will come to understand why you are where you are and how to move toward happiness and fulfillment, feeling supported. Don't put it off another day. Go to startingoverstronger.com now and click groups in the menu bar. Get registered, and for just $88 a month, you'll start this week being a part of an amazing group of women whose presence and affirmation will help you feel less alone and stuck and more clear and confident come what may.
And so let's talk about those tendencies. Narcissism itself can refer to traits that I always say tend to fall on a spectrum. Most people have some selfishness. They might have some manipulative tendencies. I think all of us who are guilty of these things maybe have tried to control some part of our lives before out of fear or what have you. Maybe even the people in our lives, have experienced that on some level. So these traits, again, they're on a spectrum. And when you're on the bottom end of this spectrum and you just have these traits because you're a normal, faulty human with issues, you have, this or you have that in a little, small way. And you just have these traits because that's just part of life. We're faulty humans, right? That's not narcissistic personality disorder. And so depending on how far your symptoms or traits fall on that spectrum would depend on whether or not you would truly be considered someone that is a covert or overt narcissistic abuser. What you want to do is just understand this whole concept a little bit better. So in addition to a big, long list of formal symptoms of the personality disorder version of narcissism that we're not going to get into today, basically, we're just talking about someone who has an anxious or depressive type of personality. They probably carry a lot of shame and guilt. They could be very introverted or extroverted. They come both ways. Social withdrawal can be a common tendency. Definitely going to see some passive aggressive behavior or defensiveness, and they probably have avoidant behaviors. They definitely play the victim, and they engage in vindictive behaviors because they actually have a really low self-esteem. So if you're in a relationship with one, you've probably at some point felt like you just needed to help build their self-esteem and help them to feel better about themselves. And what's weird about that is that they actually come across very arrogant, but they feel very bad about who they are. Someone with covert narcissism will oftentimes have what they call grandiosity or grandiose behavior, which just means they're kind of over the top. They will want to do things and say things to make themselves seem like they're bigger than life, like they're the best car on the block, they have the best house on the block, they have this best job, of all their friends. Everybody loves them in some way. They're so much better inside than others. Or I'm saying, obviously, this is how they feel about themselves. But they actually have very low empathy, even if they might pretend like they have empathetic behavior. They really don't feel the feelings of other people the way most of us do. They act that way because they know that it's socially appropriate, but they don't actually experience empathy. And there's physiological changes in the brain that demonstrate that the empathy center of the brain actually does not function the same with people who are narcissistic. Certainly, if they're a covert narcissist, they're going to be masking and putting on their public persona that's going to make them likable in their world, but they do not have the ability to empathize with other people. So these are some of the traits and characteristics that you're going to see in a covert narcissist. So in contrast, somebody that's an overt narcissist, you probably already have somebody in your mind when you're thinking about that, because they are openly arrogant, they're entitled, they're outwardly grandiose, they're super sensitive to criticism. They're self-conscious. They may be introverted sometimes, but not always. But they are just very out there with their dysfunction. They don't give a crap who thinks what about them. They will cheat people. They will lie. They will steal. They usually have trouble holding a job. They aren't financially responsible. They will do whatever they want to do, and they don't care who knows it, and they don't care who it hurts. But what we're going to talk about today is not that personality, not the overt, out there kind of narcissist, but we're going to talk about the covert narcissist. Because even though there's a lot that we'll talk about here today that you could probably apply to your overt narcissist, what I think is the biggest tragedy for so many people is that they're married to somebody that everybody else thinks is a really great guy or great girl. And so then when things fall apart, it shocks people. They can't even figure out what could have gone wrong. Everybody's favorite person, this ideal couple that they thought this would never happen to them. So it's the hidden nature of this type of abuse that is so destructive. And that's why my top recommendation for anybody facing an issue with someone that they identify as a narcissist is to get Healing from Hidden Abuse by Shannon Thomas. Now, I'm an avid reader, so I can't even count how many books I own. And I could tell you a dozen or more books that changed my life. But if I had to pick one, and covert narcissistic abuse was something I was concerned about, this would be the book that I would throw all the other books away for. This book changed my life, and I don't say that carelessly. I mean it. I don't know where I would be if I never read Healing from Hidden Abuse. I recommend it all the time because nothing in my life made any sense to me. My relationships from childhood all the way through to my marriage, I thought everything was all my fault, and I couldn't make sense of any of it. I didn't think there was any way I could ever get myself out of it. I was so stuck in the victim mentality that I couldn't have made changes because I didn't believe I could make changes. And if I didn't pick this book up and come to this understanding of what the author Shannon Thomas calls the 6 stages of recovery from psychological abuse, I would never have understood what was happening to me and what I was doing to contribute to the cycle that I was stuck in. Because the truth is, you can't change anybody but yourself. So you have to look at what you're doing, which might just be what you're allowing or accepting in your life, in order to begin to see a path forward that will allow you to get out of the situation. Now, secondly, I will say in a recent episode of the podcast, I interviewed therapist and author Margalise Feldstad on the topic of co-parenting with a narcissist. Margalise has written a couple of books, actually 3 now, that you will also want to read if this is a topic of importance to you. And I'll just name those books in the order that she wrote them, I believe. The one that made the biggest difference for me was her book called Stop Caretaking the Borderline or Narcissist. The subtitle of that book is How to End the Drama and Get On with Your Life. And what I love so much about that book was that up until I read that, I was really focused on the label. I wanted to understand and diagnose and define this set of behaviors that I was continually experiencing with my ex and the things he was doing. And I wanted to try to get him to see how he was hurting me and to care about that and to get him to change. But when I read that book, Stop Caretaking, I came to the realization that I couldn't affect change on someone else. I could only change me. And then maybe if I change me, then somehow that might positively affect the relationship enough that the other person would desire to change themselves and would decide to change along with me, which is what I had hoped would happen when I began reading it. But it didn't turn out that way for me, and it doesn't for most people, because generally speaking, narcissists don't change because they don't want to change. And the number one requirement of change is that you have to have the desire and the belief that you can change. So you have to look at what you're doing wrong and be willing to change it. So we have to apply that to ourselves. And that's what the Stop Caretaking book really showed me, is that I had to look at myself, not my former spouse anymore. And the other book that Margalise wrote that followed that, I believe, was one that I read after my divorce and where I was trying to heal. And that was a book that she called Healing from a Narcissistic Relationship. And that book has a great subtitle too, which is A Caretaker's Guide to Recovery, Empowerment, and Transformation. And boy, was it. So definitely want to grab those 2 books as well. And a third book that she wrote is the topic of that recent podcast episode on co-parenting with a narcissist. So if you have that issue as well, you want to grab that book as well and listen to that other episode. And if you truly read all of these books that I've just recommended, your life will change, I promise you, because you will change. You'll see things differently. And that's really what it's all about. So what I want you to understand about covert narcissism is how deep of a problem it is. It's extremely serious. It's also seriously prevalent in our world today. And being in a relationship with a covert narcissist leads to emotional abuse, fear, and confusion. So although they may not be physical with you ever, they very often will greatly harm your life and your potential in life. It takes a very heavy toll on its survivors.
Your divorce is almost final. Now what? Do you want to make sense of the past so you don't repeat it? Maybe you're tired of feeling ashamed for what you've allowed in your life or the mistreatment you have tolerated in your marriage, or for the fact that divorce is a part of your journey at all. Have you ever thought about making yourself a priority in your new life, but immediately worried you were being selfish? Maybe you're ready to break free of all the emotional ties to your ex and the unfulfilling or toxic relationship patterns of the past. I invite you to experience all this and more at the November 6th to 11th Starting Over Stronger retreat in the perfectly peaceful Cedar Crest Retreat Center in Pleasanton, Kansas. On your Starting Over Stronger retreat, you'll receive the rest you so desperately need. The silence and solitude, along with the tools that allow you to reflect, reframe, and reset after your divorce so you can shift away from self-defeating and limiting beliefs and behaviors. You will gain authenticity, confidence, clarity, and grace, having learned my favorite proven techniques for a calmer, more centered head and heart space. And you'll be surprised how easy this transition can be and how amazing it feels. So don't miss out. Being an intimately sized venue, this event will sell out. Find out more now at www.sosretreat.com. I'm looking forward to meeting you there and transforming with you.
And some of the signs of narcissism include an outward sense of inferiority, someone who's highly stressed or angry, definitely self-absorbed. They may be aimless, but they also may be very goal-oriented. So that goes both ways. But they're emotionally manipulative, self-centered people who lack empathy and, generally speaking, very emotionally fragile, hypersensitive. They're offended by everything and everyone around them. And so these symptoms of narcissism kind of run the gamut, and yours may be on one end of the spectrum or the other, overt and covert, but you just need to know what these traits are so you can begin to identify that this is not normal. Normal people do not go around destroying others, certainly not the ones that they took a vow to love, honor, and cherish. Now, sometimes we're all inattentive or distracted. Maybe we get jealous or angry intermittently with other issues going on in life. But being married to a covert narcissist is a very different thing altogether than the usual marital strife that we may work through with our partner. And so I'm just going to spend some time, outline some of these main traits, and from there, you will be able to make some identifications and really, decide how you want to move forward. The thing about covert abuse is that it can be very hard to identify simply because of the fact that it is covert. It's hidden. And there are signs that we can watch for, and they usually involve emotional manipulation and psychological gains. So I'm just going to go through some of the abusive behaviors that you'll want to identify if you're in this situation. And the first one is a topic that I actually talked about already on a former episode, and that was episode number 86. If you want to go back and listen to it, gaslighting. Gaslighting is when somebody does or says something that completely invalidates your experience or your memory with the intention of getting you to question your own reality. So someone who's gaslighting you might trivialize something they've done or said. Basically, they'll tell you you've made too big of a deal out of something, that you've totally misconstrued something, or they'll deny altogether that they did or said something that they did or said. And then they'll change the subject. And because of conditioning, you will learn very early on in the relationship with someone like this that when you're getting gaslit, you need to just let it go and walk away. And so they win every time. So your covert narcissist will engage in this gaslighting because it's a subtler way of manipulating you without being too obvious that they are manipulating you. And so this is a very, very big indicator that you are in a covert narcissistic abusive relationship. If you are experiencing gaslighting, if you're questioning your own reality, if you're questioning your own memory. And if that is the case, I definitely would recommend that you go back and listen to episode number 86, because in that episode, we're going to spend the whole time talking about gaslighting and what it is and how to understand it and how to deal with it. So you're going to understand it even more thoroughly than the few moments we've spent on it here today. And so then the next abusive behavior that I want to talk about is called the silent treatment. So if you live with someone that is a covert narcissist, they will resent when you don't give them the attention or respect or importance that they think they deserve. And so if you do something that they decide is disrespectful, and whatever they determine is disrespectful, even if it's not, right? And they will hold a grudge for a very long time. I mean, it is nothing for a covert narcissist to give you absolute silence for weeks at a time, even living in the same house. This is one of the ways that they let you know that they resent you. It's like a retaliation. They ignore you or don't respond to your attempts to communicate with them, or just otherwise become emotionally or physically unavailable to you. They're just not there. Like I say, physically or emotionally, they're just not present. And they may be giving you complete silence. You're more or less left as if you were a single person that's not even in a relationship, because you have to go on functioning throughout the day with your children or your job or your home life as if you're not being given the silent treatment. And this can go on for days or weeks. It's definitely a form of abuse. Another abusive tactic of the covert narcissist is to play the victim. In their minds, they are always the victim, even when they're the perpetrator and they're the ones being a jerk and doing really hateful things. Whatever your response is to that, now you've become the perpetrator in their mind and they're the victim. And actually, I'm going to rephrase that, because there's a lot of controversy on whether or not covert narcissists are aware that they're abusive, or if they're just so dysfunctional that they truly don't understand how much they're hurting other people. I could almost get behind the thought that maybe for an overt narcissist that goes around treating everyone like crap, maybe they really just don't get it. But when you're talking about somebody who's a covert narcissist, you're talking about a person who has an engaging, charming, amazing personality everywhere they go, except in their own home with their spouse and their children. So if they really truly have no idea what they're doing is wrong, why would they only do it behind closed doors? That's why I don't believe they are just wounded people who have no idea how badly they're hurting others. But they're, playing the victim, right? So they always think they're the victim. They act like they're the victim, at least even if they don't actually believe it. And they're just truly hurt and offended and upset by everything that happens. Everything you do and everything you say, you're walking on eggshells. You've heard that term, right? Because you're going to do something today that is going to upset them. And then you're going to have to deal with the repercussions of that. And they are going to believe that you're a terrible person, and they're going to criticize you and blame you for everything because they are the victim and you need to repair this damage that you've done to them. And it's just another form of manipulation. It's almost another form of gaslighting, really, because it's not true. It's not actually the way things happen. It's just what they've twisted it around to be in their own mind, or what they're trying to convince you that it is. So we've talked about gaslighting, we've talked about the silent treatment, and we've talked about playing the victim. Another abusive behavior of covert narcissists is intimidation. They might not be outwardly violent. They maybe have never laid a hand on you, but they can be very intimidating. And that intimidation could involve yelling, backing you into a corner, punching the wall near where you're standing, throwing an object across the room, either at you or even away from you, just doing something violent, like breaking a plate or something. It could even be that you're in the car going somewhere and they get upset about something and they start driving the car really fast and erratic when you're in it with them. Another way they intimidate is by gaslighting. So rather than outwardly telling you you're an idiot, they will make you feel like an idiot. So there's all these intimidating tactics that they have where they're trying to make you feel less than. And you might tell them you don't appreciate something they did, and they might say, "It was a joke. I was kidding. Can't you take a joke? I didn't know you were so sensitive." So basically, they just tear you down, dismiss your frustration, and paint themselves as nothing more than an entertaining jokester who's just a little bit misunderstood, right? Every single thing I just named is a form of intimidation and a way that they want to try to make you feel less than so they can make themselves feel better.
Ads are so annoying, aren't they? As a podcast listener myself, I know this to be true. However, as a podcaster, I also know they are necessary. It takes a lot of time and expense to put together a podcast that airs every week and comes to you at no cost. As a woman recovering from divorce myself, I know that you understand my time is valuable. And that's why after almost 2 years on the airwaves and over 100 episodes, I find it necessary to start advertising to make it possible to continue to bring you this quality content that I know you need and want each week. But you can skip the ads altogether. Want to know how? Go to patreon.com/SOSdivorce and you'll be able to select from 3 Patreon fan club member tiers that range from just $5 to $10 a month. You'll never miss it, and you never have to hear another ad again. You can also get bonus content, early access to episodes, and more. That's patreon.com/SOSdivorce, and Patreon is spelled Patreon. Thank you for your support of me as I offer support to you. We are all in this together.
So we've kind of touched on violence. What about violence? Well, typically a covert narcissistic personality isn't as likely to be aggressive or violent in their physical behaviors because they're just more likely to engage in verbal and psychological abuse than physical. And the reason is because as a covert narcissist, remember, they have a mask on out in the world that everybody thinks they're a great guy and, they're so easygoing and charming and amazing to be around. So they can't have their spouse, coming out of the house with bruises. So they will torment you verbally and psychologically way longer than they will ever think about touching you. I like to say they're smart enough to know that in today's day and age, you can't get away with slapping your woman around. So you just have to diminish her personality over the course of years so that she'll accept whatever treatment you give her besides that. But however, we're talking about a very angry person whose tendency is to keep their pain and resentment inside and to act out on it in sudden and unexplainable ways. So although they tend to be more verbally and psychologically abusive, given the nature of the aggression that they carry around with them all the time, it's not unheard of for them to become physically violent. And the thing is that oftentimes that happens when they're surprised by something, when they're caught off guard by something. And I certainly would not put it past any covert narcissist to become physical, given the right set of circumstances. So that's why, if you are dealing with one, you need to have a safety plan in place, both financially and physically, because their anger and hostility, depression and shame is just literally oozing out of their pores all the time. And, you can, as their victim, you can see it, you can feel it. So often when it's coming, and that if they feel rejected or dishonored in some way, they're going to take it out on you. So you have to be careful. Another symptom is passive aggressiveness, which is a type of abuse. It is, of course, covert as well. And the purpose of passive aggressiveness is to manipulate you or to hurt you. Obviously, it's especially if it's done all the time. Somebody who's passively aggressive is often critical of you. They judge you. They just have a lot of negative emotions. And it's done in such a way that it's actually not very easy to pinpoint because it's never what it appears to be. It's indirect, subtle, and so it seems less aggressive. It may just seem like they have a sarcastic personality, which obviously we all know people who have sarcastic personalities that aren't covert narcissists or abusers. So sarcasm can be a fun thing, but you know, if you live with this person that has this silent treatment and they always think they're the victim and they're gaslighting you and all these other things, you know if they're actually being passive aggressive with you. And, obviously there's some other examples of passive aggressive behavior, like making a joke at other people's expense or, just undermining someone like that. And these are some of the ways that you can identify that tendency. One of the things I want to say is that when you are dealing with someone like this, one of the biggest barriers to trying to seek solutions is, first of all, figuring out that this is what's going on in your relationship. But the second biggest is in your willingness to seek help. You have to be able to get past the shame and humiliation of allowing yourself to stay stuck in this situation for as long as you have. And you have to get past the fact that you don't trust others. And you have to find a safe place to get the help that you need. And that has to be with someone who's not enamored by your covert narcissist's favorable public behavior. So when you do decide that you want to get help, you don't want to be seen as the problem. And if he's got an all-around good guy reputation in the community, you have to know where to go to get that help. Don't let this stop you. I just want to prepare you that as the non-narcissistic partner, you're going to already be in a state of confusion. You're going to have been told many times that you're the problem. So when you decide that you can't live like this anymore and you're ready to move out of that isolation and to speak your truth, you need to know where to do that safely. And you also need to know that it is highly likely that there are going to be people that don't believe you. Your own family might be among them. Certainly your abuser's family would probably be among them. And depending on your level of involvement in your community, whether that's church or school or maybe even a political office or whatever your involvement is, your partner, your abuser, has a big personality that everybody likes. So you're going to be up against that persona rather than the reality of what's going on in your home. And you're going to be left with no one besides a small tribe of people who know what you have gone through because they've gone through it and that are willing to support you as you make the changes that you need to make to protect yourself physically, emotionally, financially, and what have you. So just know that. Please don't let that stop you from moving forward and getting the help and health that you need in your life. But just know that you're going to come up against that. You will need a tribe, and it does not need to be big. It can be one person. It can be 3 people. You need to know that you have some people that have your back, because you might be surprised by how many people turn on you. So just be prepared for that. And the other part of that is that you have to know that you cannot change the narcissist. You can only change yourself. I talked about that earlier when I was talking about the Stop Caretaking book. You cannot take control of your life and decide what you're willing to tolerate and what you're not any longer willing to tolerate until you believe that you can make these changes. Your mindset is going to be everything. If you don't think you can change anything, you can't. And if you don't think you can survive without him or her, you can't. And if you don't believe that you'll be okay in the end, then you'll stay, because you'll self-sabotage yourself to the point that you'll be right about your own failure to inspire change in yourself. What you believe is going to be your reality. So you have to get to a point where you believe that you are going to be better off outside of this relationship, no matter what that looks like, no matter how you get there. You can hold your covert narcissist responsible by setting limits, but you cannot make them respect those limits. So you will have to have a plan B in place for what you're going to do if you say such and such needs to happen, and they're not willing to go along with that. Just don't feel like you need to do this all by yourself, because there are therapists. You've got the Starting Over Stronger website. You've got coaching. I'm a private and group coach for people going through this. You've got support groups. You've got this podcast. And you have what a lot of people in the history of the world have not had, and that is an entire internet full of resources for people leaving covert narcissistic abuse. You do not have to do this alone. You just have to recognize that getting the resources you need to educate and support yourself through this process is going to be a big deal. It's going to be a full-time job. And the circle of people that you have around you throughout that may not be the same as the ones you've had around you through your relationship with a covert narcissist. And in fact, I can almost guarantee you it won't be the same people, sadly. People choose sides, and with a covert narcissist and their big, friendly public persona, oftentimes people choose them. And that can be what keeps people in place for a long time. But eventually, you'll recognize that those people aren't truly for you if they would choose your abuser over you or believe the lies that they're being told. People that know you know that what you're telling them is true. Okay, so the most important thing that I want you to take away from today is not an understanding of covert narcissistic abuse, although that's obviously very important, but it is what you can do about it. And what you have to know is that underneath all of this is the fact that you are a kind and an empathic and loving person. And you have gotten caught up in something that is so deep, so insidious, and so beyond what you should have ever had to deal with in a relationship that you have completely lost yourself in all of it. You are questioning everything. And I want you to just not question yourself. A key thing that helps a lot of people at this stage is to understand that your abuser picked you because of how amazing and smart and strong you are. They are like a leech, and they just wanted to latch on to you so that they could suck all of that positive energy out of you and use it for themselves out in creating their mask and their public persona, so that they could go out into the world and be this fake, amazing, wonderful person that actually you are. And then they leave you depleted because they've sucked you dry and left you at home to deal with the mess. You're not who they have made you out to be, who they've tried to convince you that you are. You're not a bad person. You are capable of so much more, and you deserve to get what you give in your relationships. And that can be one of the best ways to define whether or not you're happy or whether or not it's healthy for you to be in a relationship. What are you giving and what are you getting? And if those two things don't match, why are you staying? Do you want something different? Do you need sanity and safety emotionally or physically? Of course you do. Everyone does. And don't believe the lie that it's not possible. It is out there. But it's not going to come knocking on your door, dragging you out of a toxic relationship. You are going to have to be your own hero. You're going to have to get yourself out of that mess. And you can. And from there, you can build a life that you can love. And I hope that you've learned a lot today. And I hope you're inspired to begin to take whatever your next steps are if you need to free yourself from covert narcissistic abuse. Just understand that you first have to awaken to it. You can't just learn today that that's what your partner is and leave tomorrow, okay? It's going to take some time. There's a lot of fear and obligation and guilt. There's a ton of questions that are going on, and your awakening is going to take time. You have to understand what you're in before you can exit it. And then once you have a good understanding of it, you can begin to take the steps that you need to take to exit the abuse in a safe way. And I do mean safe as in physically, but I also mean preparing getting your ducks in a row so that you can leave without being, financially despairing, and so on. You have to take some pretty ordered steps to that end. And on that note, please go to startingoverstronger.com. At the top of that page, that homepage, there's a button to click for a free divorce prep guide. And whether or not you think divorce is in your future, that prep guide is going to be very helpful in your exit from abuse. If you're just going to separate even, or if you don't even know what you're going to do, you just know you can't live like this any longer. Get the divorce prep guide and read it and use it like a checklist. Which things on there do you need to address and which ones don't apply to you? You get to decide that, but you can create a new life you love. And the biggest piece of that is, one, understanding it, and two, being very careful about the way that you walk it out. There's an old saying that the only thing worse than being married to a narcissist is divorcing one. And if you're not real careful about how you do it, it's going to be the worst thing you've ever done in your life. It will be very, very hard to come back from. So be cautious. Use that prep guide. And I will be here to help you every step of the way. Look for my new book coming out this fall called Starting Over Stronger, Awakening and Exiting Covert Narcissistic Abuse to Create a Life You Can Love. And until then, I'll see you here again next week for more help as you divorce and hope as you are starting over stronger.